we're in sunny California to, well, take a closer look at The Evil Within, a new survival horror game from Mikami and Tango Gameworks. And can you just briefly outline what it is that we've been privy to?
So today you got to play a couple of two different chapters set in two different parts of the game, and giving you a bit more of a sense of what it is Shinji and his team are trying to do, why we think it is a true survival horror game where you're trying to scrounge for resources and use your wits. It's a game that doesn't always encourage or reward direct combat. There's plenty of times you're going to want to create distractions or run away or use the environment to your advantage to get rid of enemies. It is not a mow through guys and every time you see a bad guy try and kill him, because you'll find you die a lot. It is a tough game, and it's part of a survival horror game is having you feel not powerful and keeping you feeling vulnerable even as you're progressing through the game.
One thing that struck me when I was playing this, because it sort of kept us from learning the greater story, even though we got to play a couple of hours of the game, which is kind of a big part of the game. So what's the challenge there? Because obviously you don't want to give too much away at this point.
Sure. The story is something we've been vague on, and one of Shinji's beliefs in creating The Evil Within is that survival horror and horror needs some element of uncertainty and unknown. So as you're playing through the game, you're starting to unravel and figure out how these locations and events and fit together and what's going on. But even after you finish the game, he still wants there to be elements where you never really got a complete explanation of this, or you're really not sure what that meant, that it doesn't all get nicely wrapped together with a ribbon, that he wants there to be some things that were left unsettled or unresolved. That part of survival horror is that you don't get to know the full answer and the full truth, and some things are left unresolved. And playing through the game today, you see, like, it's not just like as you're playing through, you know exactly where you are and what's going on. That throughout the game, you still have this sense of being slightly off balance or not knowing exactly what's up.
Because I got the feeling that at certain points there was kind of a straightforward narrative. There were two characters giving you sort of what's going on here, but at the same time you feel like maybe something is going on with me that I'm not privy to, that I'm not being told outright, and that's sort of perhaps the more important story in this game, and that these things that are sort of that you're actually being shown are sort of just like.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if that's what you're taking away, then I would say that Shinji's doing a pretty good job of having you experience the kind of game that he wanted to make.
I mean, I'm looking at the logo in a totally different light after playing these 2 hours. I can tell you that, because it really feels like you are trapped inside of some sort of brain. Is it your own? Is it someone else's? Is it someone's creation?
Right.
How's this house tied to all of this? There's a lot of questions that
you start to get a bit more with the asylum here and the brain, and then the barbed wire, which is an element that just kind of we've wrapped through all of our creative, and kind of has this it plays up well with the idea of sort of being trapped and hemmed in. Yeah, I think it all the more you play it, and one of the things we've always believed is showing a survival horror game is very difficult. Watching somebody else do a thing just does not have the same impact of playing it yourself. And you can watch somebody play a survival horror game for 5 minutes and not be scared at all, and you can play it for 5 minutes and be absolutely terrified. I'm so glad folks like yourself got a chance to come out and say and see what an hour or two of playing the game really feels like, and that it is a true survival horror game and not just some action game with zombies that you mow down and move through.
So another reflection that I had is like, of course it's Shinji Mikami, so everyone says Resident Evil, but I got a lot of sort of Silent Hill vibes from it, and I also felt like the gameplay is not like a Resident Evil sort of trope, sort of a trap of Resident Evil, is that you're sort of kept from being agile, you're sort of kept from being able to do things, but you have a lot of opportunities here to do a lot of cool things, and you're not sort of stuck in this sort of boxy character that's not able to move. You can move around freely and do all these things. It's more like there's other ways to scare the player than just simply making them having troubles to survive.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, and something that I think Shinji and his team have worked really hard to bring out, which is multiple ways to scare the player, allowing the player some sense of freedom and creativity and how to face any given challenge. You don't feel like you're in a situation where, like, I'm at this end of the hallway and that thing's at the other end of the hallway and my only option is I have to shoot that thing until it's dead. That there's a variety of different ways to go through. That there'll be times where it's a difficult game, as we were talking about, but I find, like, when I die, like, I recognize what I did dumb or what I did wrong, and when I approach it, I don't just try and do the same thing better. Like, I feel much more incentivized to try something else. Like, well, maybe instead of disabling that trap and taking the parts off of it, I need to figure out how can I lure the enemies into the trap so that the trap is taking out more of them than I can take out by using, you know, what few precious shotgun shells I have or the little bit of ammo I have left for my pistol. So I feel like the game is sort of putting these things out there for me, but not hitting me over the head with them. And then when I discover them, you know, I get that sense of pride of like, whew, like I did it, and I still have a few things left. I still have a few resources for whatever the hell is coming after me next. You know, the puzzle solving and the narrative and the sound effects, the sound design, I think, is an important part of what you were talking about. There's a lot of different ways to scare, and you know, there's some really gross stuff in the game as well, which you haven't talked about. But you know, all of those different things, I think, come at a player at different times from different angles to make you feel off balance, and it's not just a one-note survival horror game, which I think is what you're reacting to.
I got this sort of that American Horror Story vibe as well. The music that's playing, the piano music, it's sort of like it's there's a lot of layers to the soundscape there, and of course there's the hints of enemies around looking for you or sort of trying to approach you. But there was one element that I really liked, enjoyed, was the random element, where I think it's Ruvik is the name of the character, who sort of seeks you out, and you get this pulse, this echo of sorts, and it seems to be random, at least from what I played. At times it's perhaps triggered, but at random at times. And that's something that really sort of struck me, because a lot of these games is sort of like you come onto a puzzle, you come onto a situation, and it's always the same. Right. But here's something and it freaks you out every time. It's something that really freaks you out, because you don't know where to run, right? Especially when you don't realize how the echo is coming towards you, or if it's coming from your back. You learn that with time, I guess. But is that something as well that you... For
sure. You know, the dynamicness of the game, again, is one of those things. It's really hard to demonstrate or portray in a demo, because you're only seeing it one time. And so you assume...
Well, I died, so...
Right. You assume when you see it, like, well, that's how it always is. But that dynamic element is exactly what you're talking about, which is you face a combat scenario and you die because the enemies moved like this, and you go to do the same thing or something different, and you find that they're reacting completely differently. Or I shoot that guy in the head and he falls down, and I run up and burn him before he can come back to life, and then I die and I try it again, I shoot him in the head, but before I can light him on fire, he jumps up at me, because this time he wasn't dead, he was just playing dead and trying to get me to come close. Like, that random dynamic element is a really good way to keep players off balance, because they understand that things aren't scripted, and you can never assume. Like, you can't assume just because it happened like this and you're having to replay it again that it's going to be exactly the same, that the game can change how challenges are presented to you, what the enemies do, what's going to happen in any given scenario. So even you shoot a guy in the head and he goes down, and you figure, well, he's dead because he was dead the last time. Only this time he's not dead. He's just laying there waiting for you to get close so he can jump at you, and now you've lost a bunch of health, and and use more ammo to kill the thing again. So it really does sort of never make you feel entirely comfortable that you're in control of the situation, even if you're playing through something you just played through a few seconds ago before you died.
One thing that we didn't really learn about was the vials of green stuff, the upgrade system. What kind of things will you upgrade in the game?
Yeah, we haven't talked a whole lot about that yet. We're sort of waiting, and some of that stuff is still kind of being balanced and changed. But there is this element of being able to both find things in the world that allow you to upgrade, as well as finding things in the world that allow you to craft things in the world, and being able to create things that you can then use in the environment on your enemy, like the agony bolts. Yeah. You may have used a few of those on enemies. You don't get any, but you can decide.
Some really nice ones in there. Some ones that you can use for traps, and others that you can use.
Right. So some of them you use directly on an enemy. Some of them you use to, like, well, I'm going to put this on the floor and lure them through here, and then that thing will go off. but it's a decision point, right? In order to create those, you have to gather resources that are usually found from something in the environment. So you have to decide, well, what's more important to me? Is it more important that I keep that tripwire there and try and lure enemies into it to take them out? Or is it more important for me to disable that trap and use the parts to create something to use on them? And of course, in disabling the trap, you can also fail, which means you not only don't get the resources, but you also just took a bunch of damage. So it is a game that allows the flexibility and gives the player the respect to say, look, you can figure out how you're going to manage this particular environment, this level, this combat scenario, however you want. And everybody's going to have a slightly different way of going about it.
So another thing that struck me, we only were able to play the 2 first difficulty levels, I believe, but there's 4 of them. How do you sort of deal with difficulty in a survival horror game, and how do you, because it would be easy enough just to sort of raise your health or lower that or things like that. How are you treating that?
It's usually a combination of things, how tough the enemies are, how much it takes to damage them. It could be something like how long they stay down if they're not actually dead before they pop back up. So you've got a much smaller window to run over and light them on fire to make sure they stay dead. It's a
ammo resource.
The ammo we usually keep pretty level, but if the ammo isn't doing as much damage, or they're able to take more damage, then that changes things. I can't speak a ton to what it's like to play those higher levels, because I struggle enough at the survival one that I'm not good enough to try the higher 2. But look, I think if you're looking for a challenging survival horror game, I certainly think Evil Within is going to step up to that challenge, because it is definitely not an easy game. It's not a game whose whole purpose is, let me see how hard it can be, because there are games that do that. But it is saying, look, part of survival horror is the survival part, and if we're going to make surviving a challenge, we got to make it tough for you to stay alive. And it definitely does that.
Yeah, and there's not a ton of hand-holding as well. I mean, you sort of have to figure out what is this puzzle about before you can even start solving it. That was my experience.
Yeah, and even in very simple things that you get used to having in games that you don't see in the Evil Within. For example, you don't get a little pop-up when you walk to a door that says, press A to open this door. Like, you walk up and I wonder if this is a place I can go. Like, it's a very HUD-free, it's a very clean experience, and we really leave a lot for the player to figure out, like, this is a thing I can do, this is a thing I can't do, because it keeps you more immersed in this world of, like, I am this guy, I am trying not to die, as opposed to, like, lots of buttons that make it feel very video gamey and sort of pull you out of that sense of immersion.
I certainly think it's a game that really highlights the importance of sort of opening doors.
Yes. Honestly, I don't know if I've ever had more fun or been more terrified of opening a door than I am in Evil Within. Like, the pace at which that happens and the sound effects and that sense of anticipation is it's one of those things, like, you appreciate somebody like Shinji and a team like Tango that takes something as simple as opening a door and makes it a real and important part of a video game. Like, that's something that can easily be overlooked. He could have just walked up to everything and swung the door open, but in the way that they do it, it just adds that much more sort of tension and drama, at any given moment to the game. And I think that kind of thing is great.
I think there's gone a lot of work into sort of measuring exactly how long that moment is going to be until you sort of can look around for yourself and gain an overview, because there's that little second where you're sort of vulnerable and you only see right around the character, and that's a really sweet spot.
And you're braced, right? Like, you're braced for something that comes, and then when it's not there, like, nothing actually happened, but you still feel really tense, and all you did was open a door, and you're actually having to recover from the tension of opening a door as you brace yourself for whatever is next. I think that's it's a really interesting dynamic as you're looking at this player loop of how often we keep you terrified, when you feel like you can recover, and how much action there is versus inaction, and showing that nothing going on can actually be pretty terrifying through the use of cameras and sound design and music, like you were talking about, sound effects. Those kinds of things can create a lot of tension where actually nothing happened. You just walked into an empty room, but it was the most dramatic empty room entrance that you've ever had.
Looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for coming to see us.
I going crazy?
Will you be able to live with yourself knowing what I'm gonna make you do?